Disc pads can usually be checked via a small inspection window in the top or rear of the brake caliper. Remove the rubber bung if fitted, and with the aid of a small torch, examine the tops of the pads. You should see the disc in the middle with a brake pad and backing plate on each side. With some caliper designs, however, it will be easier and quicker to remove the caliper to inspect the pads. To remove the caliper, first place the scooter on its centre stand. Then remove the bolts holding the front brake caliper to the suspension leg. Note: dust from brake pads and shoes can be harmful if inhaled, so wear a face mask when performing this procedure. It's a good idea to wash the brake assembly with clean water before stripping it, to keep the dust down. Caution! Do not operate the brake lever with the caliper disassembled. With the bolts removed, you should be able to remove the brake caliper assembly from the brake disc by pulling it back and turning it to clear the wheel rim. Disc pads have a wear indicator groove. If they are worn to the extent that the groove has disappeared or is only just visible, the pads must be renewed. Looking inside the caliper, you'll see that the pads fit into slots. Remove the pads by allowing them to slide inward in the space, normally taken up by the disc. They can be gently eased forward with the help of a screwdriver if necessary, taking care not to damage other brake components such as the brake piston or the rubber seal around the piston. The brake piston, some scooters have two, but the procedure is the same, will now need to be pushed back into the brake caliper to allow room for the new pads. It's normally possible to do this using an old brake pad in your fingers. If the piston seems extremely tight, then use a small G-clamp to push it back in, taking care not to damage the alloy outer of the caliper. Take care not to damage the brake piston or the rubber sealing ring, if fitted. Do not use a hammer to tap the piston back, as the whole assembly is very brittle and could easily crack. Caution! If there's evidence of severe corrosion on the body of the caliper or on the piston, the caliper will need to be professionally stripped and rebuilt. With the piston back in the correct position, i.e. pushed fully back into the caliper, wash your hands so as not to contaminate the brake pad surfaces with grease or oil. You are now ready to fit new brake pads. Apply a thin smear of copper grease to the metal back of the brake pads and shims. Do not contaminate the friction faces of the pads. Refit the caliper assembly to the front fork. If you find that you have difficulty replacing the caliper because the brake pads move and are preventing you from sliding the caliper over the disc, use a clean pencil pushed through the inspection aperture to hold the pads apart. Do not use a metal object like a screwdriver, as this will damage the brake pad surfaces. When seated correctly, fit and tighten the caliper retaining bolts, ensuring that they are tightened to the correct torque. If you removed it, fit the top back on the brake fluid reservoir. Double check everything, and if all appears correct, pump the front brake lever a few times. This will bring the new pads into contact with the disc. Check that the front wheel rotates fairly freely, bearing in mind that, unlike drum brakes, disc pads are always in contact with the disc, so it will appear as if the brake is dragging slightly. If all is correct, then take the scooter for a careful test ride. Caution! New brake pads will take at least 100 miles to fully bed in, so be aware that the scooter's braking ability will be reduced for a short period of time.